My name is Ryan Williams, and I've spent the last 9 years building sales teams in Silicon Valley. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how startups can turn their first 5 clients into 50. I spend most of my time coaching startups and working with them in 2 different ways. One, through my own business called SalesCollider, and also as a part-time entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, which is actually what brings us out here. So if you guys have seen that 500 Startups is doing a pitch competition during the festival, that's us. And so I help choose what our next companies are going to be, so we can bring them to San Francisco and work with them on sales and marketing, building their companies, getting them ready to fundraise, and potentially raise money from Silicon Valley investors. But today I want to talk, before we get into how the first 5 clients can turn into 50, I want to talk a little bit about riding bikes, which is more dramatic when the clicker works. All right, here we go. Now, if you bear with me, we'll get into a little bit about kind of what I learned a lot about myself and how it relates to learning to ride a bike. But can everybody ride a bike? Okay, good. So everybody's had this experience of being young and being able to get on a bike and be able to take off. So let me tell you how that ties in for me. But to do so, I have to go back a little bit and tell you about where I was in 2013 and how my life changed. I had started at a company called AdRoll when we were about 15 employees. And through my time there, building a sales team and building my own book of business, I learned a lot about how startups grow. And I was up close and personal when our company went from having just 15 employees to my team alone grew from 3 to 32 people in 8 months. That enormous growth was a heck of a ride to be that close to, but that's not what changed my life. After seeing that team grow and change, and this is a picture of me here bragging about them on a endorsement for some of the things that we were doing, what happened for me is that team grew to about $60 million in about 2 years. And everybody on that team scattered off and went on to start other divisions, open up offices in other countries. And around this same time, 2013, I was cold called by a founder of a startup that had 5 employees and wanted to learn about sales. Little did he know that I had spent the last 3 years thinking about how to make our sales team grow. Because before I ever got involved in startups, I actually was a teacher. So I have a background in curriculum development. I was writing our sales training plan for how we were going to grow from 100 to 500 sales reps. And that's what I was working on when he called and said, "Hey, how do I do sales?" I was skeptical. I thought I was being set up. So I said, "Well, what is it? Why do you want to learn sales?" And his answer was, "I want to learn sales because how can I manage something that I can't do?" It's a good point. So we spent some time together. I helped him assess his current sales strategy and structure and assess his team. I helped him dig in to figuring out really what the right sales plan was going to be for him to grow his company and experience some of the same growth that we had just gone through. And then as I watched him grow and change and his company develop, I had a chance to have a front row seat to watch a company go from 10 employees up to 500 employees as well. That founder, his name is a guy named Clark Valberg, and he runs a company called Envision that many of you guys might use to manage product teams of your own. They've raised over $250 million. They have over 450 employees. And it's not just that they've taken on Adobe head to head with a better way for product managers and designers to put products in the world, but they're also used by 80% of the Fortune 100. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about how you can dig in and build your own sales plans. Because what I discovered was when founders learn to sell, they have control over their own trajectory. And when I see Clark, every time I see him, he says, "Man, that was so amazing that I got the chance to sell it myself before I hired my team." And the look on his face is the same one that you get when you learn to ride a bike. We'll talk a little more about this. Do you guys recognize a picture like this back in your office? doing product planning, maybe a product roadmap. They all tend to look the same. And then up in the corner always says, please do not erase, right? We've all got one of these back in the office. But where startups go wrong is when we don't make these same kind of plans for our sales and marketing growth. What usually happens is you say, hey, we're going to build this product and companies are going to love it, and we're just going to build an awesome product because we've been given the advice of make something people want, which is not bad advice. But the problem is that's not how companies buy things. And so around the second or third year, the startup kind of trips and skins their knee a little bit, trying to figure out how is it we're going to go sell. And in that process, I think it's probably one of the problems is that you didn't have a plan to begin with. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how you can write what I call the revenue roadmap. And it's pretty simple. It's going to be basically 5 slides. But just because it looks simple, don't get to the place where you think it is simple to go do. It's going to be a hard process to go do. But if you have a startup right now and you're thinking, how can I take on sales? Maybe you're a founder and you're scared of sales, or maybe you're new to the team and thinking, this is going to be my job for us to go to market. We need to start with these 5 things, okay? We need to know our customers really, really well, and you probably start by putting an ideal customer profile in place. If you don't have one already, you need to. Founders often, when I tell them about the ideal customer profile, they say, oh yeah, I know about that. Here's my customer. I sell to these types of companies and these types of companies. But if it's not written down, how do you hold yourself accountable to it? So here's a basic ideal customer profile where we're saying, oh, it looks like from the formatting, it might be hard to read, but industries, we're going to sell to restaurants with less than 100 employees that are based in San Francisco or Boston, and these companies aren't public. 4 simple variables. You might, with yours, think about some of the things that are really specific to your industry, right? Like maybe you're only targeting companies that have a specific technology stack, or maybe you're only targeting companies that are web first or mobile first or some other kind of initial structure. But if you think about this ideal customer profile and you think, gosh, that seems like that's a really small, right? It's a huge market. Every restaurant that has less than 100 employees, it may look small because you started in 2 markets, but this is Yelp. They're in 219 cities, 34 countries. And it all starts by saying, we're going to take on this market, and this is what a good deal looks like to us. Product founders tend to think about user interviews because they're used to doing product user interviews, right? Because in the product roadmap, that's one of the steps. You go and you do user interviews. We often forget, though, in B2B sales that we need to do a buyer interview because the person who buys your product is not the same person who's going to use your product in a lot of times, right? So I want to encourage you to dig in and really learn about your buyer. Here's a typical buying process. And this is one of the things you'd learn if you got in and you said, I'm going to work with 4 or 5 people that I know are all perfect buyers. They fit my ideal customer profile. And I'm going to sit them down and I'm going to say, hey, tell me about the last thing you guys bought. Even if it's not in my space. So maybe that buyer just got done buying Salesforce.com for their sales team, but you sell security software. It's still going to be really interesting to you to ask, hey, in this big piece of software that changed the direction of your company, who was involved in that decision? Are you a company that buys things based on committee? Are you a company that buys things because one executive has sponsored it? And if you think, this is what my customer is doing, does this look at all like your sales process? Kind of in structure, because you've got several steps and you've got these really fun little arrows with the little highlighted shadow, but they're not at all the same. They don't line up. Because while you're asking for the order, they're confirming with their manager. What happens there? It means that someone else has to go sell your product for you. The person that told you, I'm the one who makes this decision, that's no longer the person who's making the decision, because they have to go and they've got to confirm it. They might be asked to do an RFP. They might be asked, hey, you can do this, but you can only buy with a PO instead of a credit card. where your startup has said, oh yeah, everybody's going to buy with credit cards. Okay? These are the critical things that you learn when you do buyer interviews. You dig in. And once you do these buyer interviews, we can start to build a sales process around how your buyer buys. Okay? Because your process has to match the steps they go through. Here's an example. All right, so this is a basic, 6-stage process. It probably looks similar to the process that you guys are familiar with from your own companies. This is a live example from one of my clients. What they had done is they built a process where there was a technical validation at the end. They sell a security software, where naturally, no one wants to buy security software if it doesn't meet your technical requirements, right? But once we started to dig in and get to know who the buyers were actually doing something different. The buyers were doing a technical evaluation much, much earlier in the process. And this may look short. This is actually a 6 to 9 month process. Because if you work at a big company, you don't want to waste the political capital to bring the IT person in or waste anybody else's time when you get down to the closing call, right? Even though that's what our startup was thinking was happening. We got to know the buyer and we discovered actually that technical validation happens much, much earlier. And now that we know that, the salesperson can create a process to engage that technical evaluation and understand whether or not it's a fit. Keeps you from qualifying bad deals. Familiar with landing and expanding? A lot of people talk about that in B2B sales. We start with kind of a minimum viable product for our startup, and we say, hey, we're going to try to sell this to 5 or 6 companies, and when they buy it, then we'll sell it to them for $1,000, and then we'll grow to $5,000, or we'll sell it to $5K, or we'll grow to $50K, right? I'm seeing people nod, so this must be something you're doing as well. Well, in order to land and expand those contracts, we have to do a couple of things, and so I'm going to walk you through the 3 things that I think about. One is making sure that the companies that we sell to have great experience. If they fit your ideal customer and you've sold to them, let's make sure they had a great experience working with you, right? In order to do that, if you take those first 5 or 6 customers and you make them your best friends, you're in their office all the time, you see how the product is used, you see how it gets handed off. Maybe your buyer was the CFO and they handed it off to their accounting team, right? These are the types of things that you can do to focus on really positive experiences. Then I also think about, okay, these 5 steps when I'm landing and expanding. And the most important one is the second one, identifying the type of expansion it is. I'll give you 2 quick examples. One expansion might be a product that maybe it's accounting software you sold to the CFO, and now you want to add additional features and you're going to double the price, where there's still one person who makes that decision. As opposed to maybe an HR software planning tool that every manager has to sign off on. You might end up having to pitch to 23 different managers, right? Different types of expansions, okay? And the third piece of land and expand are asking these questions. The most important of which is what's really going on at that client. And if you start there and you go, okay, do I really know what's going on? Do I really know how happy they are? Then we can start to actually build up and expand those relationships so then we can determine what's a better fit. And then we're going to inform our ideal customer profile based on the expansion. Of these 5 initial clients you've got, if 3 of them expand, that information goes right back to your ideal customer profile. Because those are the types of companies you want to work with. I'm also going to talk a little bit about growing a team. And it's not because I think that founders need to immediately hire a sales team. Remember, we're learning to ride a bike. We're not paying someone else to ride a bike for us, right? No matter how scary that is when the training wheels come off, you want to be the one who actually is doing it. Because what they say about learning to ride a bike, you never forget, right? I told you the analogy was going to come around to sales. All right, so let's talk about how the team. We went through a whole piece around how to think about your sales process. You're going to think about the team the same way. You're going to hire people that know your customer. You've built a process that you can hire around people who will run that same process, right? And naturally, you're going to make your clients love you. Don't kiss them though. I just couldn't find a better one. But make the clients love you, work the process, and know the customer are the three kind of most important things when you think about how you're going to build a team around this framework. Does this mean you should go out and hire right now? No, absolutely not. If you've got 5 customers and you're a team of 3 or 4, this is not the time to go hire a sales team. It's the time for the founder to do sales. But knowing what these roles are will also know kind of what hat you're wearing at the time. As a founder, are you going out and doing the process, and which of these pieces you're working on until you start to backfill and hire yourself out of a job? And then the last thing that's going to go in your revenue roadmap is identifying all the challenges. And we're not just identifying all of our sales challenges so that next year we can come back to the Digital Freedom Foundation or Festival and complain to our buddies over a beer, oh, it's so hard for me to sell this tool to this customer. It's actually what we're doing is we're identifying what resources we need to go out and take on our challenges, right? We want to know these are the things that we need in product. One of the last jobs I did at AdRoll before I moved on to another company was helping them figure out a strategy to go to market with advertising agencies. We relaunched the national team that focused on ad agencies, and then one of the first things we did is we brought the team together to do a catalog of what were the product requests that were happening from our ad agency partners, and how could we have our product team build for that. And that went right back into the product roadmap, because the customer feedback is going to naturally inform product. But if you don't capture that all in one place and tie it into what the process is, who you're selling to, why you're selling to them, how you're going to grow accounts, it makes it really hard to advocate internally for what your clients need. Does that make sense? I'll give you another quick case study. It sounds like you guys like the stories a little bit. One of the things I do in my coaching practice is I occasionally work with directors of sales at bigger companies. Most of the time it's founders, sometimes it's slightly bigger companies. So about 3 years ago, I worked with someone at Zenefits who was a new director of sales. They had come from a company where they did a $1 million deal with Boeing, which is why the bird and the jet are going right together. But they'd done this $1 million deal. And then they were asked, hey, is that what you came to Zenefits to go do? Now, if you don't know Zenefits, it's an HR management tool that primarily focuses on SMB. And they've had some good, probably some international press along the way, but at the core, they're a product that's used for SMBs. So when this person was asked, hey, do you plan on selling to Boeing? They gave the best answer ever. No, they're not the ideal customer. And that's how you know when you've done it right. When you're bringing people in and you're training them up and they are starting to learn your process and they can tell you this customer is not going to be a good use of time, that means you're starting to get to a place where you're operationalizing this revenue plan, right? You're operationalizing your revenue roadmap because your team members around you know this is what a good customer is and this is our way to sell them. Did you guys all see that the theme of the festival this year is digital detox? I'm going to leave you with one last thing. So, I don't really like kale smoothies, but this is what comes up when you start searching for digital detox. But I want to warn you about something that happens when we start talking about sales around startups. It's very, very tempting because we all love technology, and technology is so cool that when we tell someone, hey, I'm thinking about starting a sales team, I'm ready to start selling my product, that one of the first things that comes up is, here's all the tools that you should use. And we have some great sales tools. I was part of just early adopters for a lot of cool stuff when I was running a team. Building out predictive models for who to sell to. That's really cool. It's not where you're at. If you're a startup going from 5 to 50 customers, you're not going to look for how to build a predictive model. You're not looking for the coolest Salesforce app. You're not looking for click-to-quote software. Trust me, do not do it. Because you have yet to find exactly what that sales motion is. And unless you define exactly what you're trying to accomplish, what's going to happen with the technology? It's going to lead you astray. It's going to lead you down the wrong path, right? So as tempting as it can be, go back to, how do I know my customers better? And if you find yourself, loading into a tech system or a new data tool to help you go identify customers, as much as I love that stuff, that's just not the stage that we're at. Make sense? So back to riding a bike. I'm going to leave you with one promise, which is, if you take time out to sit down at the stage that you're at right now, and you go through the 5 things we just talked about to build your revenue roadmap, knowing the customer, understanding them, doing buyer interviews, understanding the customers that have already bought, why did they buy, what were they looking for, how do they find you? If you build a process around how your customers like to buy, and then after you build that process, you think about how you grow those accounts based on the ones that are happiest, and what team members, what roles you're going to need to have, and you do those roles before you hire them. Write the job description, that's fine. Then go do that job before you hire. And you identify those challenges so you can be proactive. I promise you, doing sales is as much fun as riding a bike. Thanks. If you want a copy of the deck from today, shoot me an email. I'd be glad to send it to you. Shoot me an email, remind me where we met, and I'll send this to you. I purposely left a couple minutes at the end for questions, because usually with sales, we have a lot of questions. Great, I'll just use this time to go get a smoothie. If nobody's got any questions. Are you guys running sales teams? Mostly startups? Like, who's here at a small startup? Okay. How's sales going? You can't all be acing it. You all came here. There we go.
Hi,
What's
Daniel.
up, 500 strong?
Yeah. So how do you have a framework to identify where the marketing ends and sales begin? So you basically told a lot about building a team, but how do you identify, should you focus on sales, like classical sales teams, or more of a lead gen teams?
That's a great question. When you think about if you're building a team first and you're thinking sales first, you're thinking marketing first. I don't think like that. Instead, I think about writing a plan around what our buyers do and how they, because one of the questions for your buyer, when you do the buyer roadmap and you do the interview with the buyer, is going to be very basic. How did you find the other tools you bought? And when your buyer says, I clicked on a Facebook ad, that's going to be a good channel for you. When your buyer says, I went to a conference, well, then it sounds like we're sponsoring conferences and we're talking to our industry, right? And when your buyer says, well, it starts internally, that means you're probably going to do case studies, release some guides so that people internally are searching for, how do I do this? How do I do that? Right? And when they search internally for those keywords, they're going to go through that case study that you've got on your website that explains how someone else did it. So I don't think about it as, is it marketing first, is it sales first? I think about strategizing kind of what that buyer needs. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. So if you're kind of a scaling startup, how do you kind of balance between bringing on new accounts, kind of generating revenue, and then account management in terms of what you're saying about analyzing, what's going well and spending a lot of time with those customers? I think that's something that can be quite difficult.
Absolutely. So it's tough because you got to kind of make that call as you go. But I would say that the customers that you have, if they're the customers that you want to sell to in the future, if they're good customers and they fit your ideal customer profile, that's going to be worth a lot of time to figure out, why do they buy, will they expand, how happy are they, and spending a lot of resources in the early days on making those initial customers really, really happy, I think will do dividends, will pay dividends later, because you'll understand your customer better, you'll You'll get better referrals because they'll know you better. You'll build better products because you're building around their use cases. If, let's say you get even big customers that aren't the right use case though, spending time to keep them happy just for the money, that's a short-term solution, right? Spending time with them so you can define are they the people you want to sell to in the future, that I agree with. So in terms of kind of how you split your time, I don't like sales teams to oversell and sell to too many people, because you want to go and make sure that everybody's going to have a positive experience. So that's it for today. Thanks so much.